We're Ann and Ed. Welcome to our big Italian adventure. In our last episode, we talked about buying land in Italy and designing our house. We closed on the property at the end of October, and by mid-November, we were ready to start construction. But we had one big challenge. We lived outside of Chicago, about 5,000 miles away from the property we had purchased. How do you manage the construction of a new house from 5,000 miles away, especially when you don't speak the language? Could it be done?
We figured there was only one way we could do it, and that was to have a project manager in Italy. When I posed this question to Kevin, our real estate agent, he said that he also did project management on ruins, restorations, and new construction. And through that work, he had put together a good team of a general contractor and a lot of subcontractors in addition to suppliers like for windows and doors. He is an American, but he speaks fluent Italian after his over 15 years of living in Italy. And the language skill was critically important because nearly no one on our team spoke any English at all.
So we agreed that he'd be our boots on the ground in Italy. He'd oversee things, keep us updated on progress, and be our liaison between us and our builder, as well as other people on the construction team. It was a big ask, but we had been working with him for the past, year or so on the home search process as well as the design process. So we felt pretty confident in his abilities to do this. At any rate, we took a deep breath and decided to plunge ahead.
As we'd said previously, our land was isolated out in the middle of some other agricultural land. We had the right to get to it, but at the time there was no road for contractors or construction equipment to get there. So job one was to get that road built. It was going to be a distance of about a third of a mile, which was the closest small road to our house, which then connected to a bigger road that was about a mile away.
Once that was done, we could bring in the heavy machinery that was needed to excavate a flat area on which to build the house, as well as another flat area farther down the hill for the pool, and one above the house for a small parking area.
With the excavation complete, we had to sink rebar reinforced concrete pilings 18 feet into the ground. These were required to meet anti-seismic requirements, and they would also enable us to have an open floor plan and no interior columns in the house.
The next step was the foundation. But under the slab, we had to lay an interlocking grid of igloos, I-G-L-U. Igloo is a brand name for these little plastic stools that separate the slab from the ground and allow for ventilation under the foundation. They're configured to allow air to circulate and prevent moisture from leaching up through the concrete slab that would cause mold, peeling paint, and other moisture-related problems. Over the igloos was laid a grid of rebar, on top of which a slab of concrete was poured.
We made good progress until the Christmas break. Then in January, Marche got hit with an unusually big snowstorm, which deposited up to 6 feet of snow in some areas. That set us back about 3 weeks. But Francis's team made good use of the time by assembling the rebar skeletons for our support beams back in the workshop.
Once the snow finally melted and the mud dried out a little, we could start again. First up, we had to attach the support columns to the pilings. So the rebar skeletons were attached to pilings and forms for the columns were built around them and concrete poured into the forms.
Next, the ground floor ceiling beams were put in place. These will show up later when they're stained in the final house. And we had to make our final decisions about the electrical plan before the wall construction went too far. It was important to have outlets everywhere, so it was not like an old house. And I was very interested to make sure that we had good internet service throughout the house.
Once that was done, we now could put the walls in. And the first part of the wall was the poroton blocks. Porton blocks are sort of like cinder blocks or concrete blocks, but they're made out of a more porous terracotta material, so they're much lighter weight and easier to manipulate. That being done, we framed out the second floor and the beams were built to support the roof. And finally, we put in the ceiling beams, which were structural, but also provided an authentic old farmhouse look. In May, we traveled to Italy to see our house for the very first time since the construction began. So much progress had been made. It was really exciting to see it starting to take shape.
Almost all the progress Ann talked about had been on what you might say is the shell of the building, and it was standing there. But we had made none of the decisions about the interior or exterior finishes. What stone was going to go on the outside, how were the walls going to be painted, what was going to go on the floors, what were the railings going to look like, all the fixture decisions. Importantly, we also needed to pick out windows and doors because we had those large French doors. That was particularly important. But the most important work that we likely did was with the kitchen designer. We met with Angelo and in a couple of days went through all of our options for the kitchen. This was a part of the house really important to me because I'm the cook in our house. So I had a lot of very particular ideas about what I wanted to have in the kitchen and in the layout.
One of the things Ed really wanted was an ice machine, a dedicated ice machine. He loves his ice in everything he drinks. And he had never been able to have an ice machine in any of our other houses, and he wanted to see if he could get one in this house. So he told Angelo that, and Angelo looked at him like he had three heads. He honestly thought he had misheard, because honestly, ice is just not really a big thing in Italy. I mean, they like a little ice here and there, but it's not that important to them. And so therefore, dedicated ice makers for residential use, that's just not even heard of. So finally, Ed settled on just having a separate freezer. And even then, Angelo thought it was a little bit overkill. And in hindsight, he was actually right, because we really don't use that freezer for almost anything else except ice.
But because there is ice, I don't think it was overkill at all. Also on this trip, we took a visit to a nearby stone salvage yard where we found some decorative pieces. An old sink to use outside, a horse trough to use as the base of a fountain, some wall plates with the head of a lion on them that we could use as the base of the spigots that we had. So we were able to add some additional architectural details from things that had been used in Italy in houses before. In June, they started work on finishing the ceilings by putting the pianella, the terracotta tiles that go between the roof beams. They also started on the exterior walls, but before they put up the stone over the porton, they put in a layer of insulation. And interestingly, that insulation was made out of horsehair, which seemed to me to be sort of a fun material to use in the modern world. In July, we came back to see the progress they had made on the outside and to make some additional decisions, particularly to work on the details of the kitchen and the bathrooms. We chose the style of cabinetry for the kitchen and the bathroom vanities, as well as the flooring.
And we decided to do something a little bit different with the ground floor bathroom. Kevin knew a guy who could find an old piece of furniture and convert it into a bathroom vanity. So we thought that would be a nice farmhouse touch and decided to go ahead with that.
Soon after we had come back to the US, they finished the stonework and did the tuck pointing on the exterior walls. They then moved on to doing the plastering on the inside and spent a lot of time getting the internet ready to go with our over-the-air internet provider.
In August, they installed the roof tiles, and we wanted the roof to look like an old farmhouse roof. So what they did was the first layer of tiles were new tiles, new terracotta tiles, and on top of that, they laid old tiles. So it makes it look like an old house that's been there for 100 years. In addition to that, in August, we had to make some final decisions on lighting. In fact, and then place the orders for the lighting. And interestingly, there were 27 different types of light fixtures inside and out. And of course, in combination with that, there was a lot of electrical and plumbing work going on.
In September, they started work on the exterior portico by putting in the beams and the base for that. And in a really interesting thing, they put in the piping for the underfloor heating. All of the heating in the house comes from the radiant heat from these pipes under the tiles. And
then in October, they installed the solar panels and the photovoltaic panels on the roof. And this ended up saving us money on energy, which is very expensive in Europe, and also provided us with a bit of a tax break. And in addition to that, they installed the doors and windows throughout the house.
Now it's November, and with the doors and windows installed, it was safe for us to put more valuable things inside the house. So they started installing some of the fixtures. Among those were the stair railings and the balcony railings, and the front door and arch window were constructed.
And then in December, the gas and septic system was installed, and all of the interior tiling was completed.
January, it was time to do something about our driveway, which was very steep. We'd intended to have just a gravel surface, but we realized that it needed to be paved in concrete. So they did that. And then sort of the last design decision to make was the fireplace. We wanted it in the corner of the main room where you could see it and enjoy it from the kitchen as well as from the living room.
Finally, in February, the kitchen and baths were installed, the internet was installed, and the fireplace was built.
And then March, we're essentially at the end. The house is wrapped up. I go over to go through the punch list items to see some of the details. And there were a number of small things, but in general, the house was essentially ready to go and was waiting for us to move in.
And we are still amazed, even now, that this was all done in 15 months from 5,000 miles away.
We were absolutely thrilled with how the house turned out. I think anyone looking at it from afar would have thought it's a Marche house out of the countryside that had been there for a long time and really fit with its surroundings. But once they came inside, they would have seen it was really a modern house with a great floor plan and all the amenities you'd like to have in a house built today.
So it's also tradition in Italy to name your house. And it didn't take us long to come up with a name for this house. We decided to call it Casa Avventura, which means adventure, because honestly, building a house in Italy from 5,000 miles away was quite the adventure.
We hope you enjoyed the story of our home construction and the adventure we went through. Why don't you think about clicking the like button and the subscribe button, and that way you could follow through on some of the additional adventures as we have them.
And if you have any questions about building a house in Italy, please leave them in the comment below, and we'll do our best to get back with an answer. Ciao for now.
A presto.